The blizzard had been chasing Violet Whitmore for 3 days straight, and now her legs refused to carry her another step as she stumbled through the knee-deep snow toward the dim light glowing from a cabin window just ahead. She was maybe 10 feet from the door when her vision went black and her body crumpled into the frozen drift, the cold wrapping around her like a shroud as consciousness slipped away. Inside the cabin, Yates Jenkins had just risen from his chair to stoke the fire when he heard something that made him pause. A sound like a muffled thump against the howling wind that seemed different somehow, more deliberate. He grabbed his coat and lantern without thinking, threw open the door, and nearly missed her in the swirling white darkness until his boot caught against something soft that definitely was not a snowbank. "Lord have mercy," he breathed, dropping to his knees and brushing the snow from a face so pale it nearly matched the landscape around them. She was a woman, young, maybe mid-20s at most, with dark hair plastered to her forehead and lips tinged an alarming shade of blue. Yates did not waste time with questions or hesitation. He scooped her up in his arms, startled by how light she felt, how her body seemed to be nothing but frozen bones beneath layers of inadequate clothing, and carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind him against the screaming wind. The cabin was small but well-built. A single room with a stone fireplace, a bed in one corner, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and shelves lined with supplies that spoke of a man who lived alone but lived prepared. Yates laid her on the bed and immediately began working to save her life, stripping away her wet cloak and dress with clinical efficiency, wrapping her in every blanket and quilt he owned. He built up the fire until it roared, then heated water and began the careful process of warming her extremities, knowing that too much heat too fast could be as dangerous as the cold itself. Her fingers were like ice, her feet worse, and he spent the better part of an hour massaging warmth back into them, checking for signs of frostbite, relieved to find that while she was dangerously cold, she seemed to have avoided the worst damage. When he finally sat back and allowed himself to breathe, he realized his heart was pounding as though he had run a mile. He had found her just in time. Another 10 minutes, and the cold would have claimed her permanently. It was near midnight when she finally stirred, her eyelids fluttering open to reveal eyes the color of summer grass, confused and frightened. Yates, who had been dozing in his chair by the fire, was on his feet in an instant, holding up his hands in what he hoped was a reassuring gesture. "Easy now," he said gently. "You are safe. I found you outside in the snow. You nearly froze to death." She tried to sit up, realized she was wearing only her undergarments beneath the pile of blankets, and pulled them tighter around herself, her cheeks flushing with color that he took as a good sign. "Where am I?" "About 15 miles north of Stillwater, Oklahoma. My name is Yates Jenkins. This is my cabin." He kept his voice calm and even, the way he might speak to a spooked horse. "What is your name? What were you doing out in a blizzard like this?" She closed her eyes for a moment as if gathering her strength or her thoughts, and when she opened them again, there was a depth of exhaustion in them that went beyond physical weariness. "Violet Whitmore. I was trying to reach Stillwater. My stage overturned 2 days ago. The driver and the other passengers, they decided to wait it out in the coach. But I thought I could see buildings in the distance, and I started walking. I must have gotten turned around in the snow." Yates felt his jaw tighten. "You walked for 2 days in this weather?" "I had to keep moving. If I stopped, I would have frozen." Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "I saw your light. I was trying to reach it." "Well, you made it. Just barely." He moved to the stove and ladled some of the beef broth he had been keeping warm into a tin cup, brought it to her. "Drink this. Slow sips. Your body needs warmth from the inside, too." She took the cup with trembling hands, and he noticed the fine bones of her wrists, the elegant shape of her fingers despite the redness from cold. She was beautiful in a way that seemed out of place in this harsh landscape, with delicate features and dark hair that was beginning to dry in waves around her face. There was something refined about her, something that spoke of a different life than the rough existence most women led out here in the Oklahoma Territory in the winter of 1885. "Thank you," she said after taking a few sips. "You saved my life." "Could not very well leave you to freeze on my doorstep." He returned to his chair, giving her space, aware that she must be feeling vulnerable and uncertain. "That stage you were on, whereabouts did it overturn?" "I do not know exactly. Somewhere south of here, I think. There was a ravine, and the driver lost control." She wrapped both hands around the cup, seeking its warmth. "Are you saying I walked in the wrong direction?" "Stillwater is southeast of here. If you were walking toward my light, you were heading northwest." He saw her face fall and added quickly, "But my cabin was closer than the town would have been. You made the right choice, even if you did not know it at the time. The others. Someone needs to help them. Not tonight. That blizzard is still raging, and I would not make it 50 feet before losing my bearings. Come morning, if it clears, I will ride out and see if I can find them." He stood and moved to the shelves, pulling down a shirt and a pair of trousers. "These will be too big for you, but they are dry and warm. I will turn my back while you change. Then you should try to get some more sleep. Your body has been through an ordeal." She looked like she wanted to argue, but another wave of exhaustion seemed to wash over her, and she simply nodded. Yates turned toward the fire, staring into the flames while he listened to the rustle of fabric behind him. When she said she was decent, he turned to find her swimming in his clothes. The sleeves rolled up multiple times, the pants gathered at her waist with a length of rope. She looked young and lost and impossibly fragile. "The bed is yours tonight," he said. "I will take the floor by the fire." "I cannot take your bed. You have already done so much." "I insist. You need proper rest to recover." His tone was firm but kind, leaving no room for argument. She relented, settling back under the blankets, and within minutes her breathing had evened out into sleep. Yates made himself a pallet on the floor, though sleep was slow to come. He kept seeing her face as it had looked when he first found her, so pale and still, kept thinking about how close she had come to dying just steps from safety. He was 32 years old and had been living alone in this cabin for 5 years, ever since he had bought the land and started his small horse ranch. He was used to solitude, had even come to prefer it after years of drifting from town to town, working cattle drives and breaking horses for other men. This land was his, these mountains and plains, and he had built a good life here with his own 2 hands. But something about finding this woman in the snow had shaken something loose inside him, reminded him that there were things in life beyond land and horses and the satisfaction of hard work. When he finally fell asleep, he dreamed of green eyes and dark hair and a voice calling his name through the snow. Morning came with an eerie silence that told Yates the blizzard had finally blown itself out. He rose quietly, careful not to wake Violet, and opened the door to find the world transformed into a landscape of white drifts and crystalline beauty. The sky was clear and pale blue, the sun just beginning to paint the eastern horizon in shades of pink and gold. It was the kind of morning that made a man grateful to be alive, even as the cold bit at his face and hands. He brought in wood, built up the fire, and was putting coffee on to boil when Violet stirred and sat up, looking disoriented for a moment before memory returned. She pushed her hair back from her face and met his eyes across the room. "Good morning," she said, and there was color in her cheeks now, a vitality that had been completely absent the night before. "Morning. How do you feel?" "Sore. Tired, but alive, thanks to you." She swung her legs out of bed, testing her weight on her feet, and seemed satisfied that they would hold her. "The storm has stopped." "Just before dawn. I'm going to saddle my horse and ride out to look for that stage. Can you describe where it went off the road?" She came to stand by the fire, holding her hands out to the warmth. There was a bridge, or what was left of one. The road curved, and the driver tried to slow down, but the horses spooked, and we went over the side. It was not a long drop, maybe 10 feet, but the coach tipped and the axle broke. She frowned, concentrating. I remember pine trees, lots of them, and rocks. The driver said something about being an hour out of Stillwater before it happened. Yates considered this, mentally mapping the territory. I think I know the place. That bridge has been in bad shape for a while. The territorial government keeps saying they will fix it, but you know how that goes. He poured coffee into 2 cups and handed her one. You should stay here and keep warm. I will bring the others back if they are still there. I should go with you. I can show you exactly where it is. You nearly died yesterday. You need to rest. She lifted her chin with a stubbornness that he was beginning to suspect was characteristic. Those people are in trouble because of a journey I encouraged. There was a mother with 2 children and an older gentleman with a bad cough. I need to know they're all right. Yates studied her for a long moment, seeing the determination in those green eyes, the set of her jaw. She was not going to be dissuaded, and truth be told, having someone who knew the location would make the search easier. All right, but you ride with me and you do exactly as I say, understood? Understood. They ate a quick breakfast of biscuits and bacon, and Yates found an old coat and a pair of boots that he stuffed with rags to make them fit her smaller feet. She looked ridiculous and utterly charming in the oversized clothes, and he had to force himself not to stare as they made their way to the small barn where he kept his horses. His stallion, a big bay named Ranger, snorted steam into the cold air as Yates saddled him. Violet stood back, watching with an interest that seemed more than casual. He is beautiful. Best horse I have ever owned, smart, strong, and he does not spook easy. Yates finished tightening the cinch and led Ranger out into the snow. You ever ridden double before? A few times when I was younger. He swung up into the saddle and reached down for her. She took his hand, and he pulled her up behind him in one smooth motion, her arms coming around his waist to hold on. The feel of her pressed against his back was distracting in a way he had not anticipated, warm and solid and somehow right. They rode south into the morning sun, following what Yates knew to be the main road beneath the snow. Violet gave directions as best she could, pointing out landmarks that were half buried but still recognizable. It took them nearly 2 hours to find the ravine, and when they did, Yates felt his heart sink. The stagecoach was there, tipped on its side just as she had described, but there was no smoke from a fire, no signs of life or movement. He dismounted and helped Violet down, then approached carefully, not sure what he would find. The driver was still in his seat, frozen solid, his face peaceful, as though he had simply fallen asleep. Inside the coach were 3 bodies also frozen, a woman with 2 children huddled against her, and an older man curled in the opposite corner. They had clearly tried to stay warm, had wrapped themselves in whatever they could find, but it had not been enough. The blizzard had claimed them all. Yates heard Violet make a sound behind him, a choked sob, and turned to find her with both hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. No, this is not right. They were alive when I left. They told me to go get help. You did get help. You just did not make it in time. He moved to her, wanting to offer comfort, but not sure how. This is not your fault, Violet. The cold killed them, not you. I should have stayed. I should have tried harder to convince them to come with me. If you had stayed, you would be dead too. And if they had come with you, all of you would have died in the snow before reaching my cabin. He spoke firmly, needing her to understand. You survived because you kept moving, because you were strong enough to save yourself. There is no shame in that. She turned away from the coach, wrapping her arms around herself, and he could see the guilt and grief warring in her expression. He knew there was nothing he could say to make this easier, no words that would take away the weight of what she was feeling. So instead, he did what needed to be done, taking a shovel from Ranger's pack and beginning the grim work of digging graves in the frozen ground. It took hours, and Violet insisted on helping despite his protests. They worked in silence, the only sounds their breathing and the bite of metal against earth and ice. When the graves were finally ready, Yates lifted each body with as much dignity as he could manage and laid them to rest. Violet found a Bible in the coach, water-damaged but readable, and she read verses over each grave in a voice that shook but did not break. By the time they finished, it was mid-afternoon and they were both exhausted physically and emotionally. Yates loaded what supplies were salvageable from the coach onto Ranger, then helped Violet back into the saddle. She was quiet on the ride back, her arms around his waist, her face pressed against his back, and he could feel the occasional shudder that told him she was crying. The cabin felt like a sanctuary when they finally reached it, warm and safe and alive. Yates got Violet settled by the fire with a blanket and a cup of hot tea, then tended to Ranger and the evening chores. When he came back inside, she was still sitting in the same position, staring into the flames. "You should eat something," he said gently. "I am not hungry." "You need to keep your strength up." He ladled stew into a bowl and brought it to her, sat down in the chair across from her. "I know today was hard, but you did right by those people, giving them a proper burial and reading over them. Not everyone would have done that." She looked at him then. Really looked at him, and he saw a question forming in her eyes. "Why do you live all the way out here by yourself? Do you not get lonely?" It was not what he had expected her to ask, but he found himself answering honestly. "Sometimes. But I spent years working for other people, going where they told me to go, doing what they told me to do. This land is mine. This life is mine. That is worth a little loneliness." "What about family, friends?" "My parents died when I was young. I have a brother somewhere back east, but we have not spoken in years. As for friends, I have a few in Stillwater I see when I go to town for supplies. It is enough." He paused. "What about you? Where were you headed when the stage overturned?" "Stillwater. I was supposed to meet my aunt there. She runs a boarding house and offered me a position helping her manage it." Violet finally picked up the spoon and took a bite of stew, as if talking had reminded her body that it needed sustenance. "I have been living in Kansas City for the past 5 years, working as a seamstress. But the work dried up, and I could not afford my rent anymore. My aunt is the only family I have left. She will be worried when you do not arrive. I am sure she will be, but there is no way to get word to her until I can reach town." She ate a few more bites. "How long do you think it will take for the roads to be passable?" Yates considered. "If we get a few days of sun, maybe 3 or 4 days, but another storm could blow in and set us back to the beginning. Winter in Oklahoma Territory is unpredictable." He saw the worry cross her face and added, "You are welcome to stay here as long as you need to. I have plenty of supplies, and the cabin is small, but it is warm and dry." "I could not impose on you like that." "It is not an imposition. Truth is, it might be nice to have someone to talk to besides my horse for a change." That got a small smile from her, the first he had seen since they found the overturned coach. "Your horse talks back?" "Sometimes I think he does. Usually to tell me I am being an idiot about something." The smile widened, and Yates felt something warm unfold in his chest. "There, that is better. You have a nice smile. You should use it more often." She looked down at her bowl, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "You are very kind. Yates Jenkins. I am lucky that I stumbled toward your cabin instead of dying in the snow." "I am the lucky one. It is not every day a man gets to play hero." He stood and collected their empty bowls, carried them to the basin. "I will take the floor again tonight. Tomorrow, if you're feeling up to it, you can help me with some chores. Might do you good to keep busy." "I would like that." They fell into an easy routine over the next few days. Violet proved herself to be capable and hardworking, helping with everything from cooking to mucking out Ranger's stall to mending a tear in one of Yates's shirts. She seemed to relish having tasks to occupy her hands and mind, and he suspected it was her way of coping with the trauma of what she had been through. They talked while they worked, sharing stories about their lives, their hopes and dreams, the things they had lost, and the things they still wanted to find. Yates learned that Violet had grown up in St. Louis, the daughter of a successful merchant who had lost everything in a bad investment when she was 17. Her mother had died shortly after from pneumonia, and her father had drunk himself to death within a year. She had been on her own ever since, working whatever job she could find, always struggling to make ends meet. There was a resilience to her, a quiet strength that he found himself admiring more with each passing day. She learned that Yates had been born in Texas, that he had learned to ride before he could walk, and that horses were in his blood the way some men had music or God. He had worked cattle drives up from Texas to Kansas, had broken horses from Montana to Arizona, had seen more of the West than most men saw in a lifetime. But 5 years ago he had realized he was 30 years old with nothing to show for it but calluses and a few dollars in his pocket, and he had decided it was time to build something permanent. So he had come to Oklahoma Territory, bought this land with money he had saved, and started his ranch. He had 6 horses now, 4 mares and 2 geldings in addition to Ranger, and plans to expand once he had more grazing land cleared. On the 4th day after the blizzard, the sun came out in full force and the temperature climbed above freezing. Yates saddled Ranger and rode out to check the road, returning a few hours later with the news that it was passable but still rough going in places. Violet received this information with mixed emotions that she tried to hide but that he saw anyway. "I should get you to Stillwater," he said that evening over supper. "Your aunt must be beside herself with worry by now." "Yes, you're right." She pushed food around her plate. "I will need to explain what happened to the stage driver and the passengers. Will there be someone I should report it to?" "The territorial marshal. His name is Cole Brennan. He is a good man, fair. He will want to know where the coach is and where we buried the bodies." Yates hesitated. "I can go with you if you want, help explain things." "Would you? I would appreciate that." She met his eyes across the table. "I have been thinking. I know I have stayed here longer than I should have, and you have been more than generous with your time and your home. But I want you to know that these past few days have meant more to me than I can say. You gave me my life back, Yates. I will not forget that." There was something in the way she said it, in the way she was looking at him, that made his heart beat faster. Over the past few days he had found himself watching her when she was not looking, noticing the way sunlight caught in her hair, the sound of her laugh when he said something amusing, the grace in her movements even in his too large clothes. He had told himself it was just because he was not used to having company, that anyone would seem appealing after years of solitude. But he knew it was more than that. There was something about Violet Whitmore that had gotten under his skin, into his thoughts, into the empty spaces he had not even realized were there. "You do not have to thank me," he said finally. "Any decent person would have done the same. But you are the one who did it. That matters." They rode out the next morning, Violet wearing her own dress, which she had carefully cleaned and mended, though she kept his coat since hers was beyond repair. The journey to Stillwater took most of the day, following the main road through country that was slowly revealing itself as the snow melted. The town itself was a modest collection of buildings clustered around a main street, the kind of place that was still deciding whether it would grow into something substantial or fade away like so many other frontier settlements. The boarding house run by Violet's aunt was easy to find. A 2-story wooden structure painted white with green shutters and a sign that read Whitmore House hanging above the porch. Before Violet could even dismount, the front door flew open, and a woman came rushing out, her hands pressed to her chest. "Violet! Oh, thank God, I thought you were dead!" She pulled Violet into a fierce embrace the moment her feet touched the ground. "The stage was supposed to arrive a week ago. When you did not come, I sent word to Kansas City, but they said you had left on schedule. I have been out of my mind with worry." "I'm so sorry, Aunt Margaret. There was an accident?" "The stage overturned in the blizzard." Violet pulled back enough to look at her aunt, and Yates could see the family resemblance in the shape of their faces, the color of their eyes. Margaret Whitmore was perhaps 20 years older than her niece, with gray threading through her dark hair and lines of care around her eyes. "If not for Mr. Jenkins here, I would not have survived." Margaret turned her attention to Yates, who had dismounted and was standing a respectful distance away. "You saved my niece?" I found her half frozen outside my cabin, just did what anyone would do, madam. He found himself on the receiving end of a scrutiny that was both grateful and assessing. Come inside, both of you. You must be exhausted from the journey, and I want to hear everything. Margaret ushered them into the boarding house, which was warm and clean and smelled of fresh bread. The front parlor held several overstuffed chairs and a sofa, and she insisted they sit while she brought tea and sandwiches. Over the next hour, Violet told the story of what had happened, with Yates filling in details when needed. Margaret listened with growing horror, particularly when they reached the part about the other passengers. Those poor people. Do you know their names? Someone will need to notify their families. The driver was a man called Tucker, I believe. I never learned the last names of the others. Violet's voice was tight with suppressed emotion. We buried them as best we could. Mr. Jenkins says we should report it to the marshal. Yes, Cole should be told right away. He will want to send someone out to the site. Margaret poured more tea, her hands steady despite the grim nature of the conversation. But that can wait until tomorrow. Tonight, you both should rest. Mr. Jenkins, I insist you stay here as my guest. It is the least I can do for the man who saved my niece's life. Yates started to protest that he should get back to his ranch, but the truth was he was tired and the thought of the long ride back in the dark was not appealing. I appreciate the offer. Madam, just for one night. Excellent. Violet, take Mr. Jenkins up to the Blue Room. I will have supper ready in an hour. The Blue Room turned out to be a pleasant space on the second floor with a real bed, a washstand, and curtains that matched the name. Yates cleaned up as best he could, wishing he had thought to bring a change of clothes, and then made his way back downstairs to find Violet setting the table in a cozy dining room. Your aunt seems like a good woman, he said, moving to help her. She is. When my father died, she is the one who made sure I had enough money to get to Kansas City, who wrote to me regularly to make sure I was doing all right. I should have come here sooner, but I suppose I was stubborn about making my own way. Violet arranged silverware with practiced efficiency. She never married, you know. Bought this boarding house 15 years ago with money she inherited from her parents and has been running it ever since. She is one of the strongest people I know. Strength seems to run in your family. She looked up at him, color rising in her cheeks again. You keep saying things like that. Things that make me feel like maybe I am not as weak as I have always believed. You are not weak, Violet. You walked through a blizzard for 2 days. You survived when others did not. That takes courage and strength. He reached out without thinking and touched her hand where it rested on the table. I hope you know that. She turned her hand over so their palms touched, her fingers curling around his. Being with you these past few days, it has made me remember what it feels like to be safe, to be cared for. I had forgotten that feeling. They stood there in the dining room, hands clasped, looking at each other, and Yates felt the world narrow down to just the two of them. He wanted to kiss her, wanted it with an intensity that surprised him, but before he could decide whether that would be welcome, Margaret's voice called from the kitchen that supper was ready and the moment was broken. Dinner was a lively affair, with Margaret asking questions about Yates's ranch and his life, and he found himself talking more than he usually did, drawn out by her genuine interest and Violet's warm presence beside him. When the meal was finished and the dishes cleared, Margaret excused herself to check on her other guests, leaving Yates and Violet alone in the parlor. I should probably turn in, Yates said, though he made no move to stand. Long day tomorrow. Yes? Violet twisted her hands in her lap. Yates, I know you need to get back to your ranch, but would you consider staying in town one more day? Just until I have had a chance to speak with the marshal and get everything sorted out. I would feel better if you were here. Of course. I can stay another day. He would have stayed a week if she had asked, though he did not say that out loud. You going to be all right? I think so. It helps being here with Aunt Margaret. Having a purpose again. She looked at him with those green eyes that seemed to see straight through to his core. But I am going to miss you. Is that strange? We have only known each other for a few days, but I feel like I have known you much longer. It does not feel strange to me. He reached for her hand again. threading his fingers through hers. Violet. I am not good with words. I am better with horses and hard work than I am with saying what I mean. But these past few days with you, they have been some of the best days I have had in a long time. And when I think about riding back to my cabin and you being here in town, it sits wrong with me. Like something important is being left unfinished. She leaned closer, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest. Then maybe it does not have to be finished. Maybe this is just the beginning of something. He kissed her then, unable to resist any longer, and she kissed him back with a sweetness that made his heart ache. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both smiling. I am definitely staying another day, he murmured, and her laugh was the best sound he had heard in years. The next morning, Yates accompanied Violet to the marshal's office, a small building on the main street with a faded sign and bars on the windows. Cole Brennan turned out to be a man in his late 40s with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened carefully as Violet and Yates recounted the story of the overturned stage, making notes and asking occasional questions. I will send some men out to the site tomorrow, weather permitting, Brennan said when they finished. We will need to notify the families, assuming we can identify everyone. You say you did not get the names of the passengers? I am sorry, no. Everything happened so fast, and then after the crash, everyone was just focused on staying warm. Violet's voice was steady, but Yates could hear the guilt still threading through it. The woman with the children, she had red hair and spoke with an accent. Maybe Irish. The older man was thin, with a gray beard. He said he was a preacher, but I do not remember from where. Brennan nodded, still writing. That is helpful. I will check with the stage company, see if they have a passenger manifest. He looked up at Yates. You say your ranch is about 15 miles north of here? That is right, on the old creek trail near Beaver Creek. I know the area. You have been out there, 5 years now? About that. Built yourself a decent spread from what I hear. You planning to expand? Eventually. Right now I'm focused on breeding quality horses, got a good stud and some strong mares. Yates was not sure where this was going, but he answered honestly. Brennan leaned back in his chair, studying them both with an expression that might have been amusement. You two make a good team. The way you tell the story, you are finishing each other's sentences, filling in what the other forgets. That is not common with folks who just met. Yates felt his ears heat, but Violet spoke up before he could respond. Mr. Jenkins saved my life, Marshal. That creates a bond. I am sure it does. Brennan stood, signaling the interview was over. Well, thank you both for coming in. If I have any more questions, I know where to find you. They walked back to the boarding house in companionable silence, the morning sun warming the air and turning the remaining snow into slush. Yates was acutely aware of Violet walking beside him, the way their shoulders occasionally brushed, the way people looked at them with curiosity as they passed. The marshal was right, you know, Violet said as they reached the porch of the boarding house. We do work well together. Is that your way of saying you do not want me to leave? He tried to make it sound teasing, but heard the hope in his own voice. She stopped and turned to face him fully. I do not want you to leave, but I know you have responsibilities, animals to care for, a life you have built. I would not ask you to neglect that for me. What if I wanted to? The words came out before he could think them through. What if I wanted to figure out a way to see you again, to spend more time together? Then I would say, I want that too. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. Yates, I know this is fast. I know we barely know each other. But when I am with you, I feel like I can breathe for the first time in years. Like maybe there is a future worth looking forward to instead of just surviving day to day. He covered her hand with his own, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. I feel the same way. So we figure it out. I am only 15 miles away. I can ride into town once a week, maybe twice. And when the weather gets better and the roads improve, maybe you can come out to the ranch, see what I've been building. I would like that very much. They stood there on the porch, holding hands and grinning at each other like fools, until Margaret opened the door and told them they were letting all the warm air out. But her eyes were twinkling, and when Yates left an hour later to begin the ride back to his ranch, she pulled him aside and told him he was welcome at Whitmore House any time. The winter months that followed established a pattern. Yates rode into Stillwater every Saturday, arriving in time for lunch and staying through Sunday morning. He and Violet would walk through the town, talking and laughing, getting to know each other in the 100 small ways that build a relationship. She told him about her dreams of maybe opening her own dress shop someday, using the sewing skills she had honed in Kansas City. He told her about his plans for the ranch, about the kind of horses he wanted to breed, about building something that would last beyond his own lifetime. Margaret watched them with approval, often inviting Yates to stay for supper or to attend church with them on Sunday mornings. The boarding house became a second home to him, a place of warmth and comfort that contrasted with the solitude of his cabin. But he also began to see that solitude differently, not as a source of contentment, but as a hollow echo of what his life could be. In late February, when the worst of the winter had passed and the first hints of spring were beginning to show in patches of bare ground and budding trees, Yates invited Violet to visit the ranch. Margaret came with her as chaperone, the three of them riding out on a clear Saturday morning with the sun bright and the air crisp. Violet's reaction to seeing his land for the first time was everything Yates could have hoped for. She stood in the middle of his modest cabin and turned in a slow circle, taking in the rough furniture he had built himself, the stone fireplace, the shelves stocked with supplies. "This is wonderful. You built all of this yourself?" "Most of it. Had some help with the barn, but the cabin is all my work." He felt absurdly pleased by her reaction. It is not much, but it is solid, and there is room to expand when the time comes. Margaret was examining the construction with a critical eye. "You did good work here, Yates. This cabin will stand for 100 years if it is cared for properly." He showed them the barn and introduced them to his horses, watching as Violet moved among the animals with confidence and ease. She had clearly been around horses before and knew how to approach them without spooking them. Ranger, usually standoffish with strangers, nuzzled her hand and seemed content to let her stroke his neck. "He likes you," Yates observed. "He does not usually warm up to people that fast." "I had a horse when I was a girl before my father lost his money. A little mare named Clover. I loved her more than anything." Violet's smile was bittersweet with memory. "When we had to sell her, I cried for a week." "You still remember how to ride?" "I think so. It has been years, but they say you never really forget." "Then maybe next time you visit we can go for a ride together. There are some beautiful trails in the hills, places I would like to show you." They spent the day at the ranch, and Margaret helped Violet cook a dinner that was far more elaborate than anything Yates usually made for himself. They ate at his rough table, talking and laughing, and for the first time Yates could imagine what it would be like to have Violet here permanently, to come home every evening to find her waiting, to build a life together in this place he loved. When it was time to ride back to town, he pulled Violet aside while Margaret was checking the saddle on her horse. "Thank you for coming today. It meant a lot to me having you here. Thank you for inviting me. I can see why you love this place. It is peaceful, beautiful, and there is so much potential." She glanced around at the land, stretching in all directions. "You could build something really special here, Yates." "I want to build it with you." The words came out in a rush, unplanned but completely true. "I know it is too soon to be saying things like this, but I cannot help it. These past few months, getting to know you, falling for you, it has changed everything. I do not want to just visit you in town on weekends. I want you here with me. I want to wake up next to you every morning and build a future together." Her eyes had gone wide, her hand coming up to rest over her heart. "Yates, are you asking me to marry you?" "Yes. I know I do not have much to offer yet. Just a cabin and some land and big dreams, but I am a hard worker, and I will do everything in my power to make you happy, to give you the kind of life you deserve." He took both her hands in his. "Violet Whitmore, will you marry me?" She was crying, tears streaming down her face, but she was also smiling the biggest smile he had ever seen. Yes, yes, of course I will marry you. He kissed her then, not caring that Margaret was probably watching, not caring about anything except the woman in his arms and the joy flooding through him. When they finally broke apart, Margaret was indeed watching, but she was smiling too, her own eyes suspiciously bright. I take it congratulations are in order, she called. We are getting married, Aunt Margaret. Violet laughed through her tears. Can you believe it? Of course I can. I have been expecting this for weeks. Margaret came over and hugged them both. You have my blessing, both of you. And now let us get back to town so we can start planning a proper wedding. They were married 6 weeks later, on a warm day in early April, with wildflowers blooming across the prairie. The ceremony took place in the small church in Stillwater, with Margaret standing up for Violet and Marshall Brennan serving as Yates's best man. Half the town turned out for the wedding, including several ranchers and horse traders who had done business with Yates over the years. Violet wore a dress she had sewn herself from ivory silk, simple but elegant, with her dark hair swept up and crowned with a circlet of fresh flowers. Yates wore his best suit, newly purchased for the occasion, and when he saw her walking down the aisle toward him, he felt his throat tighten with emotion. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and she was about to become his wife. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but the looks they gave each other as they spoke the words were anything but ordinary. This was a promise being made between two people who had found each other against all odds, who had been given a second chance at happiness and were determined not to waste it. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife and Yates kissed his bride, the small church erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held at Whitmore House, with Margaret having prepared enough food to feed an army. There was music and dancing, and Yates discovered that Violet was light on her feet and loved to waltz. They danced until the sun went down and the lanterns were lit, surrounded by friends and well-wishers, and it felt like the best day of his entire life. As the evening wound down, Yates and Violet said their goodbyes and rode out to the ranch under a sky full of stars. They had decided to make the cabin their permanent home, with plans to expand it as their family grew. For tonight, though, it was enough to simply be together, alone for the first time as husband and wife. Inside the cabin, Yates built up the fire while Violet lit candles, filling the space with warm, flickering light. When he turned to face her, she was standing in the middle of the room, her hair down around her shoulders, looking at him with such love and trust that it humbled him. I cannot believe you are really mine, he said softly, crossing to her and taking her hands. I was yours from the moment you pulled me inside out of the snow, she replied. I just did not know it yet. He kissed her then, slow and deep, and when he swept her up in his arms and carried her to the bed, she laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck. They made love with the tenderness of new lovers discovering each other, taking their time, memorizing every touch and kiss and whispered word. Afterward, they lay tangled together beneath the quilts, listening to the crackle of the fire and the sound of the wind outside. Are you happy? Yates asked, running his fingers through her hair. Happier than I have ever been, Violet said, tilting her head up to kiss his jaw. Thank you for saving my life, Yates Jenkins, in every way possible. Thank you for collapsing on my doorstep. Best thing that ever happened to me. She laughed and snuggled closer. We are going to have a good life together, aren't we? The best, he promised, and meant it with every fiber of his being. The months that followed their wedding were full of hard work and simple joys. Violet threw herself into making the cabin a real home, sewing curtains for the windows, planting a garden, learning to cook on the temperamental stove. She also began taking in sewing work from women in Stillwater, using her skills to bring in extra money while also building relationships in the community. Her reputation for fine needlework spread quickly, and soon she had more commissions than she could easily handle. Yates continued to build his horse breeding operation, and with Violet's help and support, he was able to expand faster than he had anticipated. She had a good head for numbers and began keeping the ranch's books, tracking expenses and income with meticulous care. Together, they made decisions about which horses to breed, which to sell, where to invest their profits. It was a true partnership, And Yates found that having someone to share both the work and the rewards made everything more meaningful. In late summer, Violet realized she was pregnant. She told Yates one evening after supper, her hands shaking slightly as she took his and pressed them against her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." He stared at her for a moment, the words not quite registering, and then a grin spread across his face so wide it hurt. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." He pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "Violet, this is incredible. You are incredible." She laughed, holding on to him. "I am a little scared. I have never had a baby before. What if I do not know what to do?" "Then we will figure it out together, the same way we figure out everything else." He set her down gently, already protective of the new life growing inside her. "We are going to be parents, Violet. Our child is going to grow up here, on this land, with the best mother anyone could ask for. And the best father," she said firmly. "I have seen you with the horses. How patient and gentle you are. You are going to be wonderful with children." They began preparing for the baby's arrival, with Yates building a cradle from smooth pine and Violet sewing tiny clothes and blankets. Margaret came out to visit regularly, bringing supplies and advice, clearly excited about becoming a great aunt. The whole thing felt surreal and magical, like their happiness was almost too much to contain. Winter came again, and Violet's pregnancy advanced. She continued working as long as she could, but by February she had grown large and uncomfortable, and Yates insisted she rest more. He took over most of the household chores, determined that she should not overexert herself. Margaret came to stay with them for the last few weeks, wanting to be there to help when the baby arrived. On a cold night in early March, exactly 1 year after Yates had found Violet in the snow, she went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Yates feared he would lose her, feared that the happiness they had found together was too fragile to last. But Violet was strong, stronger than anyone gave her credit for, and as dawn broke over the prairie, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Yates held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, marveling at the tiny fingers and the shock of dark hair, at the perfect features that seemed to be a blend of himself and Violet. "He is beautiful. You are amazing. I cannot believe you did this." Violet, exhausted but glowing, reached up to touch the baby's cheek. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but never quite settled on one. Now holding his son and looking at his wife, Yates knew exactly what felt right. "William? After my father. William Jacob Jenkins." "William?" Violet repeated, testing it out. "I like that. Hello, William. Welcome to the world, little one." The baby made a small sound and they both laughed, the tension and fear of the past hours dissolving into pure joy. Margaret took the baby so Violet could rest, and Yates lay down beside his wife, holding her hand and watching her sleep. His family, his wife, and his son. Everything he had never known he wanted until that night in the snow when a half-frozen woman had collapsed outside his door. The years that followed were full and rich. William grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the horses as much as his father did. The ranch continued to prosper, and Yates was able to buy more land, expand the herd, build a bigger barn. Violet's sewing business evolved into something more, and she eventually opened a small shop in Stillwater where she sold not just her own work, but fabric and supplies for other seamstresses. When William was 3, they had a second child, a daughter they named Rose Margaret after the wildflowers Violet loved and the aunt who had supported them both. Rose was quieter than her brother, more thoughtful, with her mother's green eyes and a stubborn streak that made Yates laugh because it reminded him so much of Violet. They built a larger house on the ranch, a proper 2-story home with enough bedrooms for the children and a parlor where they could entertain guests. But they kept the original cabin standing, using it now as a workshop and storage, unwilling to tear down the place where their story had begun. Margaret remained a constant presence in their lives, dividing her time between the boarding house and the ranch. She never married, but she seemed content with her role as aunt and great-aunt, doting on William and Rose with a love that was fierce and tender. As the children grew, Yates made sure they knew the story of how he and Violet had met, how their mother had nearly died in the snow, but had been strong enough to survive. He wanted them to understand that sometimes the worst moments in life could lead to the best outcomes, that perseverance and courage mattered, that love was worth fighting for. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates took Violet back to the spot where he had found her that night, the place that had changed both their lives forever. It was a warm spring evening, with the last of the snow melted and new grass pushing up through the earth. They stood hand in hand looking at the cabin in the distance, remembering. "I think about that night sometimes," Violet said softly, "about how close I came to dying, how if I had fallen just a few feet in a different direction, you might not have heard me. It terrifies me thinking about all the ways this could have never happened. But it did happen. You made it to my door and I found you and everything else followed." Yates pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I used to think I was happy living alone, that I did not need anyone else. You showed me how wrong I was. You and the children, you are everything. You are everything to me too." She turned in his arms to look up at him. "I was lost before I found you, Yates, not just that night in the snow, but in every way that mattered. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to wake up every morning with hope instead of dread. I love you more than I can ever say." "I love you too. Always have, always will." They kissed as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. And when they finally walked back to the house hand in hand, their children came running out to meet them, full of stories about their day. William was 10 now, already helping with the horses, showing the same natural talent his father had. Rose was 7, still young but showing signs of inheriting her mother's artistic eye and careful attention to detail. That night, after the children were in bed, Yates and Violet sat on the porch of their home watching the stars come out one by one. The ranch was quiet except for the occasional sound of a horse shifting in the barn, the call of a night bird in the distance. "Do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" Violet asked. "That you had stayed a bachelor, free to go where you wanted without responsibilities tying you down?" "Not even once." Yates took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Every good thing in my life started the night I found you. This ranch, our children, the happiness I feel every single day, none of it would exist without you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Violet Jenkins. And you are the best thing that ever happened to me, my hero, my love, my home." They sat together in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life worth living. The little cabin where Violet had collapsed from cold, one step from Yates's door, stood in the distance, a reminder of where their story had begun. But the real story was here, in the home they had built together, in the children sleeping upstairs, in the land they worked and the dreams they shared. As the years continued to pass, William and Rose grew into fine young adults. William eventually took over most of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, showing a skill with horses that exceeded even his father's. He married a local girl named Sarah when he was 22, and they built their own house on the far side of the property, close enough to help but far enough to have their own space. Rose, true to her thoughtful nature, studied to become a teacher and took a position at the school in Stillwater. She married a banker named Thomas when she was 25, and though she moved into town, she visited the ranch every Sunday without fail, bringing her own children to run through the fields where she had once played. Margaret lived to be 78, passing peacefully in her sleep at the boarding house she had run for over 40 years. Her death was a blow to Violet, but she took comfort in knowing her aunt had lived a full and happy life, surrounded by people who loved her. They buried her in the Stillwater Cemetery, and hardly a week went by that Violet did not bring fresh flowers to the grave. Yates and Violet grew old together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming weathered from years of work. But the love between them never diminished. If anything, It grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared experiences and accumulated memories. They became fixtures in the community, respected for their hard work and generosity, known for the horses they bred and the family they had raised. On a cool autumn evening when they were both in their 60s, they sat on the same porch where they had spent countless evenings watching another sunset paint the sky. William and his family lived in the house now, with Yates and Violet having moved into a smaller cottage built closer to the original cabin. It was easier for them, less space to maintain, and they liked being able to see where everything had started. "We have had a good life," Violet said, her hand in Yates's, their fingers intertwined as they had been for over 30 years. "The best," Yates agreed. "No regrets?" "None." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you remember what you said to me that first morning when I woke up in your cabin?" "I told you that you were safe. And I have been. Every single day since. You have kept me safe and loved and happy. What more could anyone ask for?" Yates kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his side. They had been given a gift that night in the snow, a chance at a life together that neither had been looking for but both desperately needed. They had taken that chance and built something beautiful, something lasting. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear, Yates thought about the young man he had been, content in his solitude, convinced he did not need anyone. He thought about the frightened woman who had collapsed at his door, lost and alone and fighting to survive, and he marveled at how two broken people could come together and create something whole, something stronger than either could have been on their own. "I would do it all again," he said softly. "Every moment, every choice, every challenge, all of it, just to end up right here with you." "So would I," Violet whispered back. "I would walk through 1,000 blizzards if I knew you would be waiting at the end." They sat together as darkness fell, two souls who had found each other in the wilderness and never let go, their love a testament to the power of second chances and the resilience of the human heart. The ranch that Yates had built alone had become a legacy they shared, passed down to their children and their children's children. The original cabin stood as a monument to where it all began, preserved and maintained, a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures start with a single act of kindness on a cold winter night. Their story was one that would be told for generations. The tale of how Violet collapsed from cold one step from Yates's door, how the cowboy pulled her inside just in time, and how that moment of rescue blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime. It was a story of survival and hope, of two people who refused to give up even when the world seemed determined to break them. It was a story of the Wild West, where life was hard and uncertain, but where love, when it came, was fierce and true and worth everything. And as Yates and Violet sat together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the land they loved and the family they had created, they knew with absolute certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be, that every step of their journey had led them to this moment of perfect peace and contentment. The cold that had nearly claimed Violet all those years ago had instead brought her home, to a place and a person she had not known she was searching for. And Yates, who had thought his life was complete in its solitude, had discovered that true completeness came not from independence but from partnership, from opening his door and his heart to someone who needed him. Their love story, born in desperation and forged in adversity, had proven itself strong enough to weather every storm, every challenge, every joy and sorrow that life brought their way. It was a love that had created life and hope, and a future bright with possibility. It was in every way that mattered the perfect ending to a story that had begun with a woman collapsing in the snow and a cowboy who pulled her inside just in time.